Dr. Hendriksen, welcome to Real Pod. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm pretty sure when I unboxed your most recent book, How to Be Enough, Self-Acceptance for Self-Critics and Perfectionists, I thought, I'm feeling targeted, I'm feeling victimized. Who wrote this book and sent it to my house?
Well, I wrote this book for me. So if you relate to anything in it, that's super cool. And we're going to be friends.
Yay. Oh my God. I'm glad. I'm actually recently diagnosed perfectionism. I don't know if that's how you would say it, but yeah, I had a therapy session with my therapist and we were just talking about things. And she was like, well, with your perfectionism, I'm like, my what? My what now? Like, what are you talking about? Because I had always thought it was, it's like a positive term. It almost is like an involuntary compliment. Like you do things really well. You are a high achiever. You excel. Anything you touch is perfect, whatever. So I'm like, never viewed it as a bad thing. But then I started to see all of the, the negatives or the obstacles it has been creating for my life since I've become more aware. Do you see that happen a lot with people?
100%. Yeah. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's everybody's favorite weakness. Like in a job interview, they'll ask you, oh, what's your biggest weakness? What's something you're working on? You're like, oh, I'm just such a perfectionist. I work too much. I'm too dedicated, things like that.
I'm too dedicated.
For sure.
I relate to that. So I guess to kick it off, because I'd really love to take everyone through, what is perfectionism? How do we see the signs? How do we cope with it? How do we live with it? How do we succeed with it, right? So can you please define perfectionism for us, maybe in the context of mental health and how it's different from simply having high standards or being ambitious?
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it highly ironic that perfectionism researchers can't agree on one perfect definition of perfectionism. So there are a lot of them out there. But the one that I like the best is that it's demanding of ourselves a level of performance higher than is required for the situation. And I like that one because you can look at it both ways. You can look at it and say like, hey, that's a good thing. Like, please keep demanding of yourself a level of performance higher than is required. So yeah, shoot for the stars, like do things really well, have those high standards. That gets us a long way. I know it got me a long way. And we can also look at it the other way, demanding of ourselves a level of performance higher than is required for the situation can also trip us up in a lot of ways. It can mean that nothing is ever really good enough, that we could always be better. We can talk later about self-criticism or something called over-evaluation, which is when we are what we do. We measure our worth as a person through our performance. It can get in the way of our relationships. There's so much it can kind of reach its tendrils into. And while perfectionism itself is not an official diagnosis, it definitely shows up in a lot of actual diagnoses like depression, anxiety, social anxiety, eating disorders, OCD, like the list goes on. So it's a cross-cutting factor in lots of our diagnoses that we see out there.
To give you a little bit of a background on me, I have dealt with a major depressive episode when I was in college, performance anxiety related to being a Division I volleyball player, and then I also had a binge eating disorder. And I feel like it literally was the perfect pressure cooker for someone like me who was like, I'm always killing it. I'm always crushing it. I'm always the best. And then, oh my God, I'm in this environment where like you literally can't make mistakes. We're the number one team in the country. I'm literally seeing thousands of people, bright lights, this major stakes moment. I'm feeling it in my chest. And like, I don't want to say I cracked under the pressure because, I found a way to fight through and I was, a participant in the games for all 4 years, but like, it didn't always feel good to be me. Most of the time it didn't feel good to be me. And then when I was like almost tweaking with my like freaking out about not being able to do everything right, that's when I fell into the deep depression.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a whole book before this about my own social anxiety. So sounds like, yeah, both of us have definitely experienced the downsides of perfectionism. And I'd argue that both of us and all the other people with perfectionism listening out there, I'm sure their perfectionism has gotten them a long way, has gotten them some nice accomplishments, has gotten them maybe some admiration for sure. Like it again, like keep your high standards. The high standards are not the problem. It's when we tip over into okay, clinical perfectionism, according to the model I chose, is from Doctors Ross Shaffrin, Christopher Fairburn, and Zephyr Cooper. And they say that the two pillars of clinical perfectionism are, this thing called over-evaluation, when our evaluation of ourselves becomes like the same as our evaluation of our performance. So again, we are what we do. And that could be anything. That could be our grades, our quarterly evaluation. I've definitely worked with athletes who only feel as good as their last game, musicians who only feel as good as their last performance. It could be, did I parent correctly? Anything. We can over-evaluate any aspect of performance. So that's one. And then the second pillar of clinical perfectionism is self-criticism. And so everybody criticizes themselves from time to time. It's the heart of human self-regulation. We watch ourselves so we can check ourselves and stay in harmony with the group. But in perfectionistic self-criticism, it is particularly harsh and particularly personalistic. It's about us. So those two things are what sort of pushes it over into where perfectionism costs us more than it buys us.
Wow. Once again, can't wait to have a full-on therapy session in this episode. I have so many questions about the relation between self-criticism and perfectionism. Before we get to that, I did want to ask, where does perfectionism come from? Do we know the answer to that? Obviously, I just referenced my story, and it almost felt like I arrived to college with perfectionism or that in me. So I'd love to know, and I'm sure our listeners would as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that question has a lot of answers. So it is in our genes. So again, even though it's not a disorder, it's a tendency that's definitely passed down from our families. So it comes from within. It also comes from our families. The researchers, Gordon Flett and Paul Hewitt, have identified 4 kinds of families that make it particularly likely that we'll come out of 18 years under the roof with some perfectionism. And I want to emphasize, you can come out of any family perfectionistic, but the 4 kinds are sort of like a helicoptery, snowplowy, overprotective type of family. I like to think of Marlin in Finding Nemo, like, if I'll never let anything happen to you, but then nothing ever happens, right?
He
So
literally means it. He's like, you won't experience anything.
Exactly. So that's 1. And then 2 is a perfectionistic family, a family that's sort of hard driving, high achieving, like really hard on themselves. Like, we think that's normal. And so of course we're going to turn out the same way. 3rd is a family where love and pride get confused. Like, love seems like it's contingent upon performance. And so then we learn to evaluate ourselves by what we do. And our parents might take less interest in, say, like our personalities or our interests or our deep feelings, as opposed to like when we deliver. And then the 4th kind of family is sort of a chaotic, unstable family where kids will double down on their performance in order to have, a sense of control and a sense of safety. It makes perfect sense. So sort of like, I can't control dad's drinking, but I can control my grades. Or I can't control like mom being chronically ill, but I can be outgoing and the most bubbly girl at school. So those 4 types of families make it, again, more likely, but you can come out of any type of family perfectionistic. And then finally, perfectionism is all around us. So it can come from within, but it can also come from the environment. You talked about your volleyball team, and that is something that the researcher Andrew Hill would call a perfectionistic climate, where you're not allowed to make mistakes. And if you do, you are harshly criticized. And so when he first started researching this, he was thinking about environments sort of like, the highest levels of sports, like classical music auditions. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that, and there's research to back this up, perfectionism is sort of creeping into the culture all around us. I would argue that social media is a perfectionistic climate. I would argue that a lot of, honestly, society is really becoming a perfectionistic climate. It's in our kind of hyper-capitalist, highly competitive society. Every human reacts to the situations we're put in. So whether we're put into, a number 1 volleyball team, or we're just put into America in 2025 and we feel like we have to perform and achieve and consume to ever higher levels to be sufficient as a person. Of course, we're going to react by feeling like we're not good enough and have some perfectionism. It makes sense.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's so helpful to have things to point to or to reflect on as we all look at our own lives. I do think I probably primed myself with a personal identity complex of like, I'm always expected to have achieved a lot. And like, well, I don't think my parents wouldn't love me if I didn't win. Like, that's my role in the family. Like, that's what I do. But then I just had an unlock when you talked about the volleyball team because I'm like, it was so strict my freshman year. Like, if you were 1 minute late, 1 minute, and you could have said, I helped an old lady walk across the street. Someone ran into me with their bike. It literally did not matter. The excuse was not heard. We were all going to run at 6 a.m. the next morning. And then also, like, my specific role on the team was a libero. So, basically in my job, you're supposed to pass the ball to the setter. And when you do your job, you pass that ball perfectly. If you don't pass it perfectly, you're not doing your job. I've been trying to look back at my childhood to been like, where did I become this really highly self-critical perfectionist in my childhood? And I can never come up with an answer. And I'm like, maybe it was actually my 4 years of Division I volleyball.
I mean, it fits the bill perfectly, right? Like it's like you said, you're not allowed to make a mistake. You have to do everything perfectly. There's no forgiveness. There's no wiggle room. Like there's no understanding. Absolutely. And that's not a you issue, right? That's not something like if you put anybody in that position, they're going to react the same way. Like that's a systems issue. And so I don't think it's realistic to expect individuals to like just work harder and like feel safe and confident in a climate, where you're harshly and personally criticized, when mistakes inevitably happen, not because you're incapable, but because you're human. So yeah, climates like that lack psychological safety. This is the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, where she finds that if it's a systems issue, again, like one person really has kind of limited power to change that. I appreciate what you did. You certainly are continue to work to change the system of perfectionistic climates. And like if you were back in that volleyball team, I would say the whole volleyball team would have to create a climate where everybody from the first years to the seniors to the coaches to everybody feels empowered to speak up and believes they're not going to be punished or humiliated for doing so, because the best teams don't actually make fewer mistakes. They just don't push them underground, right? They talk about them and they figure out like, okay, well, how can we do this better? How can we work together? Yeah, it's not just forbidden, because inevitably they're gonna squeak out, whether in volleyball or in life.
I think this then leads us to a common misconception, which is like, well, to be the best team or to be the best performer at your company, this is the standard that champions hit. This is the marker that, billionaire entrepreneurs hit, right? So like we tell ourselves that, it's just not an option to not excel to a certain level. So, I mean, how do you address that? And how do you advise people find like a happy medium where they're not doing more than, what is requested in the moment, back to your definition, but they're also reaching their potential?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many directions we could go. So, okay, let's do over-identification. It's where we are what we do. So forgive my grammar, but it's when I did good equals I am good, and I did bad equals I am bad, right? Then our worth is never a settled question, because with every performance, however we're measuring that, whether that's like I need to make six figures, I need to hit my goal weight, I need to play this game perfectly, I need to hit the dean's list, whatever it is, every performance, however we define that, becomes a referendum on our character. And so I think that perfectionism, if we look at it that way, is sort of a misnomer, because it's not really about striving for perfection. It's about never feeling good enough. It's like that I am what I do. So I think part of what we can do there is like, we're never going to separate ourselves from our performance entirely, like nor would we want to. Of course, we're going to feel proud when we do well. Of course, we're going to be bummed when things don't go as planned, but we can try to focus less on ourselves and more on the work. So to try to shift from talking about ourselves in an evaluative way to looking at the work and saying like, okay, how can I make this thing better? Like taking the stance of a sculptor eyeing a block of marble, like a chef tasting the dish. Like, we know inherently that the sculptor and the sculpture, or the chef and the dish, are different things. And so here, I'm
I'm
going to
following
change gears
that.
a little
I'm
bit.
following that.
Yeah. So our attention, okay, here I'll do our attention is like a spotlight, and we get to choose where to point it. So if we point it at ourselves, we often feel worse and perform worse. Like if our self-worth is on the line, or again, our performance is a referendum on our character, that's so much pressure that we're probably going to do worse. When we turn that attention spotlight outward and focus it on the work, we generally feel better and we perform better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one, to focus on the work for the work's sake. I can tell you. Go ahead.
I was going to add and know that regardless of the outcome, your sense of enoughness and your sense of self and worthiness is unchanging, right?
Right. Your high standards are not the problem. So please, everybody listening, keep your high standards. I think that imperfection is sort of having a moment in our culture, as it should. I think that's fantastic. But I also think that the advice around it can get a little misguided, because what I often hear in talking to people with perfectionism, they've said they've been given the advice of, you need to stop when things are good enough, or like you have to lower your standards. And that's never going to resonate with somebody with perfectionism, because good enough, doesn't resonate when it's something from which we derive our value. And like we wouldn't settle for subpar or mediocre performance, because that would mean that we're subpar or mediocre. So again, rather than lowering our standards, what we can do is give ourselves some permission to make mistakes, so that we can retain our view of ourselves as good people and create some wiggle room for the inevitable, mistakes of life. So if I'm working with someone with perfectionism, I'll often ask them to generate like a percentage or a number of mistakes that they can reasonably expect of themselves, or that they would expect in someone else. And the answer, if it's like 0.5% or 0.1%, matters less than the fact that the answer is not zero. I was working with a pediatrician, and she has a storied career. She had been a clinician for 25 years. She really knew what she was doing. But then she had a day at work where she misdiagnosed a little girl who came in with abdominal pain, and she sent her home thinking it was constipation. It turned out to be appendicitis. And she had to go to the emergency room. Everything was okay. She was fine. But my client, the pediatrician, came in and was just so hard on herself, with saying like, I need to get my brain examined. Like, I'm a terrible doctor. Like, I should just retire now, because she had set the bar at flawless. And I would argue that we should not tell her, oh, you can stop when things are good enough, or you can lower your standards, because that's, keep the high standards. You want to aim for doing as well as you can. But over 25 years, how many misdiagnoses would you expect a colleague to make, or how many can you allow yourself? And then when the mistakes inevitably happen, again, not because we're incapable, but because we're human, we can chalk that up to, oh, there's that 1%, there's that 5%. And so we could, any amount of wiggle room we can give ourselves just gives us some room to breathe and some room for what's going to happen regardless.
I think that's so powerful, because often the perfectionist mind is it's 0%, right? I could never disappoint a friend. I could never forget a birthday. I could never turn in an assignment and miss a deadline, right? And it's like, I almost think when I'm working with people, I try to go the opposite, where I'm like, hey, I expect you to make a mistake. Like, it's okay if you do, because I know how I feel, and like, I don't want other people to feel that way. But even just telling yourself, right there, that's the 5%, that's the 10%, that's the 8%, I think is a great coping mechanism I'm going to adopt. And earlier, Dr. Hendriksen, we were talking about self-criticism. So I would love to hear more about how you think self-criticism and perfectionism feed into each other.
For sure. Yeah. I think so self-criticism is like the other, pillar of clinical perfectionism. And so, like I said before, everybody criticizes themselves from time to time. It's the core of our ability as humans to self-regulate. A healthy dose of self-judgment helps us, evaluate our behavior, modify it to improve ourselves, get along more harmoniously with our fellow humans. But when we tip over into perfectionistic self-criticism, it becomes harsh and personalistic. And so what we can do, and I'm sure you've heard of all this, but we can do a little bit of a deep dive, is some self-compassion. And so Kristen Neff is a researcher at the University of Texas, and she defines self-compassion as three things. So one is self-kindness, two is non-judgmental mindfulness, and three is connection to the larger human experience. But the perfectionistic brain is reverse threaded for all three of those things. That does not come naturally to us, because instead of self-kindness, we are wired to be self-critical. Instead of non-judgmental mindfulness, we can be judgmental. We zero in on flaws and details. If we pull out all the stops and actually reach our high standards, we decide that the standards were insufficiently demanding in the first place, and we reset the standards, like we move the goalposts. And then instead of connecting to the larger human experience, we see our mistakes or struggles as shortcomings that set us apart, rather than as common experiences that connect us to others. Like oftentimes when we make a mistake, we find that to be shameful, and we might react by, withdrawing or isolating or otherwise trying to hide that. So we're working, it's an uphill battle with our brains for sure. So that's how it ties in. And we can talk about how we can both use change and some acceptance to work on that self-criticism if you want.
I'd love that. How do people who are nodding along thinking, yep, that's me. I'm, judging myself for having the judgmental thoughts when I'm not supposed to be judging, right? It's like anything you try mindfully, it just finds a way to morph into a criticism or a way that it's not good enough. I find that sometimes with meditating, I'm like, why am I singing a song in the back of my head? Or why am I now thinking about work again? Be back to the moment. It's like, and you're compounding it, but you have to focus on letting go of the judgment of the experience. So yeah, I'd love to, what are some of those coping mechanisms or those skills that when someone in the perfectionist thinking has recognized they're doing it, they can get out of it?
Yeah, for sure. We get to decide where to point that attention spotlight. And so what we can try to do is try to take the emphasis off of us and put it on the thing. So there's a big difference, subtle but large difference between I messed that up versus I messed that up. So we can try to focus on the error as sort of a third-party thing, as opposed to an inherent flaw or problem with ourselves.
Wait, the way that you just adjusted your tone inflection actually altered my brain chemistry. It's so true. I messed it up. Sends to me, I always do this. I always make mistakes. I'm never good enough. Versus I messed that up. That small task, that little thing, that's fixable. There's an error. You know what I mean? Like even just the way that you said the exact same sentence really did communicate to me the way that we personalize things that are not personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Second, we can give ourselves some self-compassion. I know that's not new news, but I think we can tailor it for the perfectionistic brain. So I know for me, like I took the idea that we were supposed to be compassionate to ourselves by talking to ourselves like a good friend. Like I made the bar too high. I thought I was supposed to generate this like steady stream of like articulate and like effective self-compassionate hype to myself, but that was like way too high a bar. So over time, I learned that self-compassion doesn't have to be words at all. It can be actions. So it can be, just a gesture, it could be a hand on our heart, it could be a few more minutes to enjoy our coffee in the morning. It could be just whatever we need to do to turn towards our pain and ask, what do I need right now? So it can be an action. But especially for the perfectionistic brain, it can be permission not to do everything we expect of ourselves. So self-compassion some days might be, saying, I'm going to go to the gym because I know I feel better after I work out. And for other days, it might be, I'm going to give myself permission to skip the gym because what I really need is an extra hour of sleep, or what I really need is to just unwind or to give myself a break. So all in all, self-compassion is asking, what do I need? And it can be an action. It doesn't have to be talking to ourselves at all. And it can be an inaction. It can be permission not to do all those things we expect of ourselves.
I love that so much. Would you say that's like healthy self-acceptance, what it actually looks like for perfectionists?
Yeah, if we back up to like what is self-acceptance, it's it's a willingness to, understand or acknowledge or receive more of ourself, even the parts we find objectionable. Because we all have the tendency to make our lives harder. But if we're willing to accept some of the things that we struggle with or make mistakes around, if we're willing to have those, it reduces our suffering. Mistakes are only a problem if we think we're not supposed to be making them.
Mm.
So those are two things. And then one that I like is we can pull the lever of acceptance. And like, for instance, I know that my brain is just wired to be a little bit self-critical. And so rather than trying to change the content of some of my self-critical thoughts, I can change my relationship to those self-critical thoughts. Again, like everybody self-criticizes, we're all going to do it. But I have learned to, especially here, especially after I do anything involving a microphone, my brain will just start going and be like, oh, why did you say it like that? Or like, you said too much, or you weren't personal enough, or, oh my God, you forgot that point. So like after we get off this recording, probably my brain will be like, ugh, why did you do that? But I have done this often enough that now I know that that's just what my brain does. And so I can treat that self-criticism kind of like the music at a coffee shop. Like I know it's there, like I can hear it, it's not going away, but I don't have to sing along, right? Like just because my brain says it to me, I don't have to take it as truth. A mentor taught me to try to hold problems as if I would a small animal. Like you have to hold them firmly because you don't want them to get away. You want to like take care of them, but you can't hold them too firmly because that'll make a big mess. So to take our problems and our self-critical thoughts and our mistakes seriously, but not that seriously, to hold them lightly and just let them be there.
Thank you for sharing that because I relate. I feel like I overthink a lot of things that I do, conversations, meetings, and I think it takes vulnerability to be doing something and be like, hey, and this is a thing that I know that I will overthink later. And I know that in the book you talk about how vulnerability is actually sort of the opposite of a perfectionistic self-presentation in a sense, and that vulnerability helps us actually break down that need to have this perfect front. So could you share more about what it means to be vulnerable and why it's important that whether you're a perfectionist or not, but all human beings try to tap into that more?
Totally. Yeah. So vulnerability is a willingness to reveal, thoughts or actions or emotions that might result in criticism or rejection. Like if we think of the word vulnerable literally, it means being at risk. Like we put ourselves at risk when we disclose something vulnerable, but it's essentially letting people see some of the mess. And when we're vulnerable, it sends two messages. It signals, I trust you, and we are the same. And the opposite of that is perfectionistic self-presentation, which is when we only show what's going well and we hide what's going poorly. And it makes sense, like we're trying to keep ourselves socially safe by putting our best foot forward, by hiding the mess. But then what often happens is we come across as like unrelatable or superhuman or intimidating or distant. And that very wall that we are putting up to keep ourselves safe from possible criticism or rejection is a wall that keeps us isolated and disconnected. So perfectionism, it seems like a personal problem, but it's really an interpersonal problem. It's really something that keeps us separated from the connection that we're all craving.
There's nothing more powerful than when you finally open up and you, whether you're crying or you're just speaking from the heart, you're just being yourself and you feel then seen by someone else and connected to them. And then you form an even deeper relationship. Like, I think especially with friendship, which talking about loneliness and wanting to be around humans and feel seen by them and vice versa, I don't think I can't have a good friend if we haven't like had some shares, or I know some of your trauma and you know some of mine. I almost think when I'm making friends in my 20s, sometimes I have jokes with some of my friends I made out in LA in adulthood is like, new friend level being unlocked. So did I ever tell you that in 2006? Like, you know what I mean? Because we know that those are the moments that do bring you closer.
Right. And yeah, when you do that, yeah, you signal like, I trust you. Like, here's some of my mess. Like, I trust you not to judge this or criticize this or reject me for it. And we're the same. This is not some kind of like mentor-mentee relationship. This is not like some expert like student relationship. We're equals. And that's, that equality is the foundation for friendship. And I think especially for people with perfectionism, it can be hard to remember that because it feels really, really fraught to show some of the mess, because we often think that, okay, so we measure ourselves by how well we do things, so our competence, but other people measure us by how kind we are, by our warmth. So good performance also can be this double-edged sword because it can put us on a pedestal, but then to mix my metaphors, we also end up on an island. So it's sometimes in perfectionism, we end up in this mindset of like, okay, I have to do things really well so I can kind of earn my way into positive regard from other people. Like I have to earn like admiration or respect or trust. And there are aspects of positive regard that we do have to earn, especially in American culture. We're used to having to earn positive regard, but we can't earn love. We can't earn friendship. Those are freely given. And I think sometimes we can get those confused. Like the greatest wish of a person with perfectionism is to be like loved, accepted, belong without having to perform at all.
What are some of the daily mantras or habits that you think a person could adopt right now, tomorrow, that could help inch them closer towards more self-compassion, more sense of enoughness, and away from this like self-critical perfectionistic thinking?
Sure. Yeah, I think we can keep an eye out for the rules that we try to live by. So those of us with some perfectionism like are drawn to rules. We want to know the rules so we can follow them. And if there's no rules, like we set up our own personally demanding rules and then follow those. So I think we can listen closely to if what is driving us is a should, like I should do this, I have to do this, I must do this, and to try to switch the yardstick from did I do the thing, like am I doing this correctly, to am I living the life I choose to live? So essentially like switching from rules to values. When we're living our values, the qualitative sense starts to change and it doesn't feel coerced or obligatory or dutiful. Like I think when we're driven by rules and the sense of have to, there's always the sense of obligation that like, okay, this is what I've got to do. And if we can change it to asking ourselves, am I running towards something that I find meaningful, purposeful, fun, then that's different. That's freely chosen. Because values are never coercive or obligatory. You freely choose to follow them. And you're probably likely to like tolerate some discomfort like in order to do so. So like if, for example, a value of giving back might be why you're willing to like give up your Saturday morning to go volunteer and pick up trash on a beach rather than spending the day relaxing at the beach.
All of this is so incredibly helpful. So thank you so much. And your book was incredible as well. But as you're talking now, it just reminded me of this should versus want versus like how it makes you feel, because I've had to notice in things recently in my life, I threw my husband this extravagant 30th birthday party and it was amazing, but I did too much. I went too hard. And like, it wasn't worth it. And I did it in the hopes that I could, control his emotions. Like he would be so incredibly happy. He would say, this is the best weekend. Not like I want to control him, but I just mean like, no. I did everything I could so that he would have this perfect experience. And then The day we came home from this, what I thought was, a perfect weekend in so many ways, he received a really, really beautiful gift from someone in his life. And it was a very emotional gift as well. And so like you come off of this high of like, for him to me thinking he'll enjoy Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, I'll be like the birthday. And it's like, bam, Sunday. Now he's like fully in the feels of this very emotional 30th birthday gift. And I remember sitting there so happy for him that such a meaningful gift was given. But I was like, wow, okay. I could bring in bells and whistles. I could bring in a unicorn. I could cut every little party napkin. I could fold and bead every necklace. And it doesn't matter. I can't control someone else's emotions. But now I sit here feeling like, oh, was I present enough in the weekend? Was I super stressed the weeks leading up to it? I didn't have to be like, so I'm taking what I learned from that into, I'm a maid of honor for my best friend's bachelorette. There are certain things where I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited to be making this thing for her, for the girls. Like, and it makes me happy. And then there's other moments where I'm like, well, I should make sure that every room has XYZ. And then I'm like, no, that's the part of you that's like not going to have fun and is going to stress out. And like, you don't have to. Like I'm trying to identify now when that like perfectionism should voice comes in of like, this is what the world's best maid of honor would do versus this is what a normal good friend, normal maid of honor would do who also will enjoy her party. Like you shouldn't be blowing up pool floaties in the back by yourself if every girl's having a margarita. Go have a margarita and no one's going to notice that there weren't pool floaties. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. I think so. Yeah, I've been in moments like that as well. I'm sure there's a lot of heads nodding. If we look at perfectionism behaviorally, what we'll often see is some sort of overcompensation. We'll overdo it. We'll over-prepare. We'll over-rehearse, overwork, like show up overdressed, be overly friendly. Absolutely. Like this happens over and over and over again. Then like we miss out on the moment. And so in order to be able to connect and enjoy, I think we often put all of our eggs in the basket of performance. So like, let me do what the perfect bridesmaid would do, like what the ultimate maid of honor would do. I got to do the thing. It's performance based, right? And so we can take some of the eggs out of the performance basket. Performance is still important. You want to do your job, but to put some eggs in the basket of connection. So to remember to be there with your people, and some eggs in the basket of enjoyment to remember to enjoy the moment, to have a nice time, to be truly present so that you can have that memory forever, for sure.
I've been thinking more about presence too and realizing that it's a muscle. Like you can't spend all this time forward thinking for this party, this event. I'm going to make all the things, do all the things, organize. And then guess what? The event comes and you're not even able to really get into the moment because it's like we live in the future and like your mind's thinking about the flight home and the unpacking and what you have with work next week. And it's like you're missing the only thing we ever have, which is right now. Yesterday is gone, tomorrow doesn't exist. Like I've been thinking about that a lot and how almost in the athletic way, like you need to build the muscle of being present in moments because it's not easy to do.
It's not easy to do. And I think the good thing about being conscientious and actually, being perfectionistic is that we're used to doing hard things, right? Like we can use some of that perfectionistic muscle to lean into having a good time or being in the moment and realizing that we can, improve and get better at being present, being in the moment. And honestly, there might not be that much that we have to change. It might just be that undercurrent that changes. Because if we're used to thinking, okay, like I have to do this, like, okay, like let's take the example of like being a good friend. If we're thinking I have to be a good friend, then that means, to your point, I have to remember their birthday. I have to ask them detailed questions about their life. I have to surprise them with their favorite coffee order when we go for a walk. None of those are bad. Please keep doing that. But that sense of have to, that coercion, the duty, the obligation gets in our way. And that can make, in this example, like friendship, feel like a people-pleasing grind, right? And so if we shift to a value of being present or being attentive or being supportive, and we're freely choosing to run towards that, we might still remember their birthday, ask detailed questions about their life, surprise them with their favorite coffee order, but the quality of that experience changes and it feels like a choice rather than a should. And that makes all the difference.
Wow. Lastly, I want to talk about a sense of enoughness, being enough, literally the title of your book, How to Be Enough, right? How can we really feel enough when maybe we had external expectations we didn't meet for ourselves or other people put on us, or we're comparing and we're not feeling like we have earned the right to feel enough. So in the last 5 minutes, cure that for everyone.
I wish I could wave a magic wand. Absolutely. No, yeah, you bring up really important points. So comparison, I think, is really important to address. And I do want to say that comparing ourselves to others is inevitable. Like the scientist who originated the theory of social comparison found that it is hardwired. We can't even tell if we are tall or short without comparison. So like trying not to compare ourselves is basically fighting biology. So that's okay. Like it's going to happen. But I think fundamentally, when we feel not good enough, we use comparison to answer the question, am I doing okay? But then what happens is we outsource our worth to the people we're comparing ourselves against. And our self-esteem rises and falls with each comparison. It puts us in a very low power position because we're essentially putting ourselves up against other people and asking, okay, do I win or lose? And then our worth is never a settled question. So I don't mean this to be a quip, but it kind of is. So the easiest but most time-consuming way to stop comparing is just to get older. Comparison declines as we age. So just living your life and letting time pass is already doing something to reduce comparison. But what we can do is to affirm, while we wait to get older, we can affirm what we know to be genuinely true about ourselves, even if it has nothing to do with what we're comparing ourselves about. So anything that you know to be fundamentally true about yourself. I'm a consistent and compassionate friend. I was put on earth to help the less fortunate. I have wicked awesome style. I love my kids with all my heart. Like the goal is not to like kind of line ourselves up and compare and think, well, okay, even if she does X well, I do Y better, or okay, but if she sucks at Z, rather than trying to line ourselves up like that and compare, we're trying to uphold like a consistent narrative of our whole self's adequacy. So affirm what you know to be true about yourself, even if it has nothing to do with what you're comparing yourself about.
I think that's beautiful. I'm very impressed. You gave a great answer to a huge existential question at the end of it. I love it so much. Actually, my therapist recently told me, hey, could you just journal something that used to be hard for you, that it's not hard for you now? And just can you take some time to focus on like the growth that you've had independent of anything else? And it's exactly what you talked about, like to take the time to recognize what we've overcome, who we are, what we've learned, and all those things are independent of a grade in school, a GPA, the scoreboard of the end of volleyball game, and if we can foster that, how we'll now show up in the world with like this unwavering sense of I'm not flowing with the opinions, the ups and downs, or what the news says today about me, XYZ. Because like who you are, and it's okay to be misunderstood, and that you'll have your own back.
Absolutely. I think we can see the kind of bumps and foibles of life as that this is just part of how it goes. It doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It means that this is the package deal and I'm actually doing it correctly. Mm-hmm. So I think we've all been working so hard for so long. And I if I could shout it from the rooftops, I would say, like, just live the life you want to live, not somebody else's generic idea of the right thing.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. I could not agree more. Thank you so much, Dr. Hendriksen, and congratulations on your book, How to Be Enough, Self-Acceptance for Self-Critics and Perfectionists. You can get it now wherever you get your books. Thanks for sharing all this wisdom with us. I know myself and any fellow perfectionist Real Pod listeners are feeling like we have some tools and huge takeaways as we chug along.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.